Nowadays, we're surrounded by touchscreens at all times. Companies make touchscreen fridges, toasters, and air fryers, and obviously, all of our phones are touchscreen now too. In fact, there's a good chance you used a touchscreen to click on this very video. But there was a time, not too long ago, when touchscreens were something new and exciting. The origin of the touchscreen can be traced back as far as the 60s. But personally, when I think about what technology really popularized touchscreens, two pieces of technology come to mind. Of course, the iPhone's release in June of 2007 is still one of the biggest things to happen in tech probably ever, but the importance of the Nintendo DS popularizing touchscreens cannot be understated. In case you've been living under a rock the past 20 odd years, the DS was Nintendo's fourth portable system and was released on November 20th, 2004 in North America. It went on to become the third best-selling video game console of all time, sitting only behind the Nintendo Switch and Sony's PlayStation 2, which seems to mysteriously sell a few million more units every time the Switch gets close.
I'm joking. Some
great games came out of the DS's massive library of roughly 3,200 total titles, including some of my personal favorites like New Super Mario Bros., Sonic Rush, WarioWare Touched, Mario Kart DS, Picross DS, Kirby Squee Squad, and my all-time favorite, The World Ends With You. So it's safe to say the DS is a pretty legendary system that's fondly remembered by most. And it was as I was looking back on the Nintendo DS that I thought about its initial unveiling at E3 2004, which was host to an abnormally large number of tech demos and prototypes. For those who don't know, a tech demo is typically a demonstration made to show off what the system is capable of doing, and often remains unreleased and not developed into a further product. Even if a console doesn't have a playable tech demo or a tech demo shown off publicly at all, there are still demonstrations like these made behind closed doors for pretty much every console ever made. And the DS was no stranger to these, with Nintendo's booth at E3 2004 hosting a large number of cool and interesting tech demos, most of which are unavailable to play today. So now let's travel back in time 22 years and take a look at that E3 showing. More specifically, the lost Nintendo DS tech demos and prototypes within it. Before we even get to E3 2004, it's important that we set the stage for the announcement of the DS. Months before E3 on November 13th, 2003, Nintendo officially announced that, for the first time since they went public in 1962, they were suffering losses in the first half of a fiscal year. This was largely due to the underperformance of the GameCube, which, despite being one of the best consoles of all time, argue with the wall, unfortunately sold rather poorly. Still, Nintendo had high hopes that they would make it back into the green very soon, due to a 29% price cut on the GameCube, the release of the iQube player in China, the continued success of the Game Boy Advance, and, most importantly, a completely new gaming product that they planned to launch by the end of 2004. At the time of that initial announcement, it was unknown whether this new gaming product would be a new console, handheld, or something else entirely. However, the next day, a Nintendo spokesperson clarified that the company would be launching a new unique device, stating, quote, "We hope to present a new product in America's Expo next year, which will be completely different from the traditional. We hope we can release it within the year in Japan. It would be ideal if we can release it simultaneously overseas." All questions would be answered 2 months later on January 20th, 2004, when Nintendo would officially announce their new portable system, codenamed Nintendo DS, for dual screens, with further details set to be announced that May at E3. Initially just announced as a dual screen system with two 3-inch LCD screens, there was no mention of its now famous touchscreen capabilities just yet. Nintendo also stressed that the DS was designed not to replace the GameCube or the Game Boy Advance, but more so to serve as a third pillar for their software. It's important to note that nowadays, many people, including me, think of the DS as the successor to the Game Boy Advance, but in reality the Game Boy Advance wasn't even 3 years off from its March 2001 release when this announcement came. As an extreme example of how fast a generational turnaround this was, if Sony had put out a new PlayStation every 3 years since the PlayStation 1's initial launch in December of 1994, we wouldn't be on the PlayStation 5, we'd be on the PlayStation 11 right now. I personally suspect that the specific framing of the DS's role in the market was put in place due to the extremely experimental nature of the system. In case it failed, I assume Nintendo would have still wanted consumers to feel that buying a Game Boy Advance was a safe investment, assured that Nintendo and third-party companies would still be making games for that platform, which they consistently did until the release of the last GBA game in 2008. The reaction to the initial announcement of the DS seems to generally be be one of shock. IGN's Craig Harris, who will be coming up quite frequently in this video, penned an article the morning after, on the 21st, titled Nintendo DS, WTF? In which he expressed his initial reaction and predictions of what the system might bring to the table, capping off by saying, quote, "I honestly don't see the big picture with the Nintendo DS. Why will gamers buy a system? Because it has 2 screens? That's it? There has to be something else." Little did anyone realize that the DS had one last trick up its sleeve. May 11th, 2004, the first day of E3 and the day of Nintendo's press conference. The show started with a reel of exciting new games before Reggie Fils-Aimé, having joined Nintendo in December 2003, took the stage for the first time ever and introduced himself to the gaming public.
My name is Reggie, I'm about kicking ass, I'm about taking names, and we're about making games.
The show immediately transitioned to footage of Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, followed by Star Fox Assault, then Resident Evil 4, all back to back.
And we like games so scary, they keep you up at night.
But it wasn't until a bit later into the show that Reggie declared, "The wait is over," and pulled out a prototype DS from his suit's inner pocket. He went over the power of the DS before revealing Super Mario 64 DS and Metroid Prime Hunters, much to the amusement of the audience.
Here's a brand new Metroid game playing on Nintendo DS.
Soon after, Reggie officially revealed the touchscreen capabilities and the built-in microphone, alongside its wireless connectivity and Wi-Fi compatibility. Reggie finished his explanation of the DS by stating they're targeting release later that year in both America and Japan, launching under a new name. And while the DS did make that launch window in the projected regions, its name remained unchanged, probably because the DS was already a perfect name. Oh, and even though it's unrelated to the launch of the DS, I can't finish a recap of Nintendo's presentation at E3 2004 without bringing up their final announcement, as its shadow loomed over Nintendo's booth that year. That final announcement being the explosive reveal of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, which was one of the most anticipated games ever at that point. E3 2004 lasted from May 11th to May 14th, though most reports of Nintendo's booth that year come from the 12th onward. Located in the West Hall of the Convention Center, booth 2816, IGN staff described the atmosphere of the booth as, quote, "A dizzying array of lights, pounding music with heavy bass, and a fog cloud, partly created by the many unwashed geeks trafficking the floor." The dizzying array of lights in Nintendo's booth were handled by the lighting company LightSwitch, which had handled the lighting for Nintendo's booth the previous year too. Thankfully, LightSwitch still has very nice photos of Nintendo's booth up on their website. Many games were playable at Nintendo's booth that year, including Pikmin 2, Star Fox Assault, and Zelda 4 Swords, but the real highlight of the booth was the DS section, which was kept separate from the GameCube and Game Boy Advance games, due to the ridiculously long lines created by fans eager to play. People waiting in line could entertain themselves by looking up at a giant screen overlooking Nintendo's whole booth, which rotated through trailers for various upcoming Nintendo titles. IGN reported that, quote, "The Legend of Zelda was one of those trailers, and I can tell you that every time it played, the many folks waiting in the DS line cheered." After waiting in the DS line for several hours, you wouldn't just be led into a room with some systems. No. Nintendo made sure the experience of trying the DS went off more like an amusement park attraction rather than just a normal demonstration. Every 15 minutes, Nintendo booth workers would bring in groups of people from the front of the line past a set of doors, leading into a corridor lined with monitors on the ceiling. These monitors would feature Mario, Luigi, and Wario riffing as the attendees walked down the hall. At the end of the corridor, attendees would enter a room with a large screen on one of the walls showing a 3D model of Mario. Everyone would then be herded into orderly rows of 10. The specific setup of these rows would become important later. As guests were being filtered in and formed into rows, the 3D Mario on the screen would converse with the audience and 2 female identical twin presenters, who had been hired by Nintendo to host the event. Mario would usually spend this time making jokes, having several reoccurring bits making fun of Sony and referencing the end of The Empire Strikes Back.
Boy, that's Sony. It's fantastic. What's the matter? You don't like my impression? But Red, what about me? Frankly, Scarlet, I don't give up. Here's Johnny. I'm not going to hurt you, Wendy. I'm just going to break you neck.
That was good. They bleeped you again.
Oh, that's all right. I don't give up. Here comes a good movie. This is a good movie. Loki, come and join the dark side of the Force.
No, thank you.
I'm you papa. No, you're not my papa. Yes, I'm you papa. Stop saying I'm not you papa, you little brat. I'm gonna chop your hand up with my saber sword. Chop!
Oh, Papa, why you chop my hand up with your laser sword? You should take that show on the road, that's right.
Yeah, if I take that show on the road, they don't come back.
Once everyone was in the room, the show would begin, with Mario introducing his friend, Charles Martinet, the voice of Mario at the time, who had been hiding behind a curtain, controlling and voicing the 3D Mario on the screen live. E3 Insider would later conduct an interview with Martinet, in which he would reveal exactly how this system worked backstage.
And originally, we had a mask on my face with rollers and things that would grab the way I talk and translate through a supercomputer. Now, Mike Fusco has created such a technology that it works on any standard home PC, and Mario picks up my voice, my sounds from my voice, and translates it through the computer to Mario's voice.
That's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. And then you have a little joystick so I can move him around, and I can wink, blink, and winky, winky. And then, of course, I can say, Mamma mia, isn't that Wario a nice boy? Whoop.
Martinet would briefly recount his history with Nintendo before leading into a pre-recorded video displayed on the big screen, showing people of varying ages in various situations enjoying the Nintendo DS. Every once in a while, either Charles or the twins would make a joke about what was happening in the video.
If I'd had this in high school, I'd have had a date.
Double dates.
Oh.
Another video would immediately follow this one, showing developer reactions to the DS, before transitioning once again to a third video, which was a close-up of the prototype DS featured at the convention, narrated live by the twins.
DS also has twin backlit screens. That's right, the bottom one is a programmable touchscreen, so the controller can be unique with every game experience. It is truly amazing. Awesome.
This last video also featured the only glimpse of Nintendog seen at E3 that year. I should take this opportunity to go over the physical differences between the prototype DS featured at E3 2004 and the DS system that was released later that year. As on the surface, they look very similar, but taking a closer look reveals numerous differences. The prototype DS system prominently featured large orangish red bezels around both screens. A total of 4 concave mints were on the unit, 2 for the speakers on the top half and 2 for the buttons and D-pad on the bottom half. The power, start, and select buttons are reversed from their placement on the final DS system, with the power button being on the right while the start and select sit on the left. By far the biggest difference in units is seen in the shoulder buttons, which were 2 large red circles on the prototype unit, as opposed to the classic rectangle shaped buttons on the final product. After the third and final video ended, it would finally be time for the attendees to try the DS, and the way this was handled was simple. 2 of the aforementioned rows of 10 would be selected at random, indicated by a spotlight shining onto them. The 20 attendees selected would then be escorted to the private DS playing area, while everyone else would be escorted to the public DS playing area with significantly fewer games. IGN stated in their booth report article that members of the press were escorted into the private area on a case-by-case basis. Upon entering either room, guests would be given a commemorative Nintendo-branded strobing DS stylus, with a medallion on the end reading, quote, "The future of handheld gaming, Nintendo E3 2004. Additionally, while supplies lasted, anyone who played the DS would be given a DS-branded t-shirt. After receiving their gifts, attendees would then be allowed to roam the room and try various DS tech demos, with each demo having its own kiosk. According to some reports, these kiosks were in very poor condition by the end of the last day of E3 due to rough handling by many attendees. Both the private and public DS rooms included a glass case housing multiple prototype DS's, game cases, and cartridges for attendees to gander at. The games featured in the public area include Carving, Pac-Pix, and WarioWare. IGN also reported that attendees could, quote, "win a Pokemon" by playing the scratch portion of the Pikachu tech demo in the public area. Some footage of the public area also features Metroid Prime Hunters as well as Pac-Roll, so I will be including those as part of the public lineup. The private area had a much wider selection, featuring Balloon Trip, Bomberman, Carving, Egg Monster Hero, Mario Face, Metroid Prime Hunters, Mobile Suit Gundam Seed, Pac-Roll, Pac-Pix, PictoChat, Pikachu, Sonic, Special Effects, Submarine, Super Mario 64 x 4, Table Hockey, WarioWare, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Nightmare Troubadour. Additionally, while not playable on the show floor, Nintendo announced Animal Crossing, Mario Kart DS, and New Super Mario Bros. Short snippets of footage were made available online for all three of these titles. Now it's finally time to start going over these tech demos and prototypes. Some of these would end up being released as full games, and a few of these have since been found, but a large majority of them remain completely lost media. In order to keep things simple, I'll be starting with the games playable in the public area, before going through all of the games from the private area in alphabetical order, and then finally capping off with the 3 games not playable on the show floor. Carving was a tech demo developed by Nintendo and specifically attributed to Takashi Tezuka and Hideki Kono. For future reference, in an interview with IGN's Craig Harris, Tezuka claimed that he and Kono were responsible for, quote, about half the software for the DS on the show floor that year, though Carving is the only tech demo directly credited to them in the article. As such, I will simply be crediting the rest of the tech demos developed by Nintendo to the whole company, though Tezuka and Kono's involvement was likely. Carving was a very simple tech demo built to show the 3D rendering and touchscreen capabilities of the DS. In the demo, the player would pick between one of 6 different materials, with said material then being rotated horizontally and placed halfway onto the bottom screen. The player was then free to chisel away at it with the DS stylus. Of these 6 materials, 4 of them are confirmed to be wood, metal, watermelon, and Mario. Additionally, looking through screenshots seems to suggest the other 2 materials were gold and Yoshi. During carving, the bottom screen would display both a retry and a finish button. Pressing the finish button would stop the carving and center the full object on the bottom screen, allowing the player to view the object in full 3D, using the stylus to rotate it and a slider to zoom in and out. Once the player was done viewing the object, they could press either the destroy or display button. Destroy would cause the object to explode and the demo would start over afterwards, while display would send the object floating up to the top screen, where the player would then be prompted to name it within a max of 4 characters. It seems as though carving featured 2 themes. The first and most prevalent one is the space theme seen on the E3 show floor, which has a photo of the Earth as its background. This theme is seen in almost all footage of carving. The second theme, seen only in additional footage released shortly after E3, shows a woodworking style background, complete with the buttons on the bottom screen now looking wooden. In this version, there also seems to be a meter on the bottom screen not present in the version on the E3 show floor. It is unknown what this meter would have done. Most of the tech demos and prototypes seen on the DS that year seem to have visual differences between the version that was on the show floor and the version featured in captured footage released after E3. I will try to make these differences known when I spot them. Despite its simplicity, reporters seem to thoroughly enjoy carving, with Kikizo's staff describing it as having, quote, surgical precision in its touch controls. During the interview with Takashi Tezuka and Hideki Kono I mentioned earlier, IGN's Craig Harris commented that he personally enjoyed the carving tech demo, to which Kono laughed and responded, quote, that's a good one too. When we were making the carving demo, we thought, what could we possibly do with it now that it's done? And after seeing the reaction it's getting, we're really glad we made it. Harris also wrote in his own hands-on article for carving, saying, quote, some of these non-games were pretty fun in their own right, even though it's tough to say how they'll ever come to market when the system finally hits shelves. Carving would never end up being released as part of a finished product. With the tech demo itself having not been seen since E3 2004, it unfortunately remains lost media. Pac-Roll is a 3D platformer developed by Namco and released on July 28, 2005 in Japan. This prototype at E3 2004 was its first official showing. Personally, I'm not super familiar with the final release of Pac-Roll, having only played the first couple of levels a few years ago, but I remember it being pretty fun. The general gameplay of Pac-N-Roll seems unchanged from its final release, though the camera in this build appears far more zoomed in. You roll Pac-Man around a 3D environment on the top screen by swiping across his visage on the bottom screen. The faster you swipe, the faster Pac-Man will move. Very simple, but fun nonetheless. The giant Pac-Man head on the bottom screen seems identical to the one in the final game, though the background he rests on is different. The difference in gameplay comes in the form of the player's goal, as this demo seemed to feature a level more akin to traditional Pac-Man rather than the final game's much longer courses, with the only objective here being getting all the pellets while avoiding the ghosts. This prototype also seems more life-based, like the arcade original, having Pac-Man die immediately if he comes into contact with a ghost. In the final game, Pac-Man has hit points and can survive an encounter with the ghost as long as he shakes it off the bottom screen in time. Because of these changes, Pac-Man's life meter is visually very different from the final build, instead being represented by Pac-Man shapes, again similar to the original arcade game. A timer and score counter are also present on the top screen in this demo, which are noticeably absent in the final release. Additional footage released after E3 2004 shows a slightly different environment, appearing to take place in space, with different colored blocks and ramps. The ghosts in this footage also have arms, while the ghosts in the footage from the show floor don't. Both IGN and the UK's Nintendo official magazine gave high praise to Pac-N-Roll, directly comparing it to Sega's Super Monkey Ball, with IGN's Craig Harris describing Pac-N-Roll as, quote, a really fun Marble Madness meets Super Monkey Ball meets Pac-Man. Pac-N-Roll would officially be released in North America on August 23, 2005, with Craig Harris returning to award the game an 8 out of 10. Unfortunately, the demo from E3 2004 has never been found and is considered lost media. However, the stage from this demo was graciously included in the final release of Pac-N-Roll as the second level in the game's bonus world, Pac-Moon. Pac-Pix is an action puzzle game developed by Namco and released on March 10, 2005 in Japan. This prototype at E3 2004 was its first official showing. Unlike Pac-N-Roll, I actually do have some personal history with Pac-Pix, as it was one of the first DS games I ever got back when I got a DS in 2007. The gameplay of Pac-Pix is simple, but very unique to the capabilities of the DS. Ghosts spawn on the bottom screen, and it's the player's job to draw a Pac-Man shape using the DS stylus to combat these ghosts. If your Pac-Man looks Pac enough, the game will recognize it and breathe life into it, making it move forward in the direction you drew it facing. From here, you can draw lines for Pac-Man to bump off of, changing his direction. In the final game, your goal would be to eat all of the ghosts in the level before being allowed to move on to the next, but this prototype takes a more arcadey approach, simply having you eat as many ghosts as you can before time runs out. Visually, there are many differences between this demo and the final release. The UI is completely different, as well as the stage background, ghost designs, and color of the lines you draw. According to IGN's Craig Harris in his hands-on article about the Pac-Pix demo, this prototype also featured an ink meter on the top screen. Drawing anything would use up ink, so you had to be accurate with your drawings, otherwise suffer the consequences. This is future Lime Jinjo editing this video. I'm actually going to add an addendum about the ink meter here because while in Craig Harris's IGN hands-on article about Pac-Pix, he words the ink meter like, oh, you use it and then the ink is gone, so you can run out of ink. But when I'm editing this footage and looking at it even more closely, I see the ink meter actually fills back up if he stops drawing. So, I mean, I wasn't there, I didn't play the game and they did, so I could be wrong, but it kind of looks more like the ink meter was there to stop you from drawing too big a Pac-Man, and you get the ink back as long as you stop drawing for a second, but I don't know, I wasn't there, so I don't know. On top of this, you had to be careful that a ghost wouldn't move through your drawing before you could finish it, as ghosts could erase any part of a drawing they moved through, thus ruining it. Nintendo official magazine had high praise for Pac-Pix, saying, quote, Nintendo aside, the most genius shown on the Nintendo DS. Though they capped off their article by commenting, quote, hopefully they'll lump both DS Pac-Man games in together. Craig Harris had similar doubts about Pac-Pix's ability to serve as a standalone title, stating more bluntly, quote, I don't think this game could stand on its own, but it might make for a good additional gameplay challenge in Pac-N-Roll. Namco, however, was unwavering in their passion for Pac-Pix. In an interview for the May 2005 issue of Nintendo Power, the game's producer, Hideo Yoshizawa, described the early development of Pac-Pix. According to Yoshizawa, Pac-Pix had begun development years prior, around 2001. The concept for Pac-Pix came from its director, Tetsuya Shinoda, after he had noticed the way corrective text disappeared on an Apple PDA.
Hey, Dolph, take a memo on your Newton. Beat up Martin. Bah!
The initial prototype for Pac-Pix was developed on proprietary arcade hardware before it ended up being shelved, with the team returning to the project later in an attempt to develop it for tablet computers and PDAs. Unfortunately, the development team realized the target audience for Pac-Pix didn't really own these devices, leading the project to be shelved once again. Later, when Nintendo DS development kits were given out, Yoshizawa felt the time was finally right, and Pac-Pix began development as a DS title. Pac-Pix would be released on April 26, 2005 in North America, with Craig Harris returning to award it an 8 out of 10, stating that Pac-Pix had, quote, managed to pull through as a successful concept on the Nintendo DS in its final form. Unfortunately, this particular E3 2004 demo of Pac-Pix has yet to be found, remaining lost media. Pikachu is a pet simulation tech demo, and one of the most infamous demos shown that year, being the only one themed after the massively popular Pokemon series. The demo would begin by fading in on a grassy park area, complete with a wooden gate with a sign reading Pokemon Park. The gate would then open, and Pikachu would come running through from the top screen to the bottom screen, greeting the player. The player would then be free to play with Pikachu's cheeks, ears, and tail. Occasionally, a heart would appear from Pikachu and float towards the top of the screen. A small button on the bottom left of the screen would have Pikachu bring up the activities menu. These activities include 3 instruments: the gyro, the guitar, and the xylophone, as well as 4 other activities: balloon, drawing, measure, and pull, with pull being the default activity. The guitar appeared to be an electric guitar, themed after Pikachu. After presenting the whole guitar to the player, the game would zoom in on the pickups and allow the player to freely strum the strings. The bottom right of the screen would display what note/chord had just been strummed. The xylophone was pretty straightforward. The player would be presented with a xylophone that allowed them to individually tap on each key, creating a different sound. Tapping on a key would make the mallet appear briefly, before music notes would appear above the key that was hit. Unfortunately, there is very little footage of the gyro activity, only about 1.5 seconds of video. Based on a very short clip, it seems like the gyro would have functioned very similarly to the xylophone. The player would be free to rub it up and down, while text appeared on the top screen stating, "Play it on the beat," so it's possible this could have been a sort of rhythm minigame. In drawing, a drawing pad would appear, with color selection on the far right of the bottom screen. Pikachu would run to the bottom screen behind the slightly transparent drawing pad, and text would appear on the top screen stating, "Pikachu wants you to draw its picture," before allowing the player to freely draw on the pad, with the goal being to attempt to trace Pikachu. Afterward, the drawing would be handed off to Pikachu for him to react to. In the footage provided by IGN, they traced him rather poorly, so the text read, "Pikachu does not seem to like your picture very much," before changing to, "Pikachu seems happy that you played with it." It can be assumed Pikachu would like the picture more the better he was traced. In the measuring activity, Pikachu would reportedly hand the player a measuring tape before going off into the distance on the top screen. Pikachu would then start fishing in the lake, catching Magikarp and throwing them to the bottom screen for the player to measure by dragging the measuring tape from one end to the other. The bigger the fish, the happier Pikachu was. Only a few seconds of footage can be found of this activity online. Tragically, there is no written or visual documentation on how the balloon activity would have worked. After the player had spent some time with him, Pikachu would eventually hold up a scratch-off ticket and hand it to the player. The player would then use the stylus to scratch off one of 4 circles, revealing an image of one of the 3 Kanto starters in doll form. Afterwards, the ticket would disappear, and the top screen would display the doll you got, with text circling it saying, "Congratulations." As Pikachu waved goodbye on the bottom screen, the demo faded to black, leaving the player with a plain white text saying, "Bye." In IGN's Nintendo DS booth presentation article, Craig Harris mentions that in the public DS area, attendees could, quote, "win a Pokemon by playing the scratch portion of the Pikachu demo." So it's possible that Nintendo would give attendees a real-life plushie of the Pokemon they had won in the demo. I was able to find the Pokédoll plushies from 2004 that look identical to the ones in the demo, so it's likely that if plushies were handed out, these were the ones you would have received had you played the demo in the public area. I actually bought the Squirtle plushie so we can get a closer look at it in this video. Isn't he so cute? Look at him. So cute! Lastly, I wanted to mention some contention behind whether this tech demo made any use of the DS's microphone or not. As Cerebi.net said about the demo, quote, "It is also said to use the microphone on the DS somehow, though I'm unsure of their source." On the other hand, IGN's Craig Harris said regarding the microphone, quote, "There's talk that the designers of this Pikachu game will use the voice recognition and microphone of the Nintendo DS system for other design ideas." The version at E3, however, didn't have this function, and only offered very limited option in terms of playing with Pikachu. So it remains unclear whether this demo had microphone support or not, though I personally find it unlikely. In that same IGN article, Harris likened the Pikachu demo to similar games like Hey You Pikachu and Pokemon Channel, assuming this would develop into a full game in a similar vein to those. And while a Pikachu Pet Simulator was never released for the DS, part of this tech demo was reused for the title screen of Pokemon Dash, which was released in December of that same year. This section of Pokemon Dash shares the same model of Pikachu as the tech demo, but only gave the player the ability to pull on his face, as all other activities were removed. Pokemon Dash was developed by Umbrella, the same development studio behind Hey You Pikachu and Pokemon Channel, so they were likely behind the development of this Pikachu tech demo as well. Unfortunately, despite being one of the most well-known and sought-after tech demos from E3 2004, the full Pikachu tech demo has yet to be found, and is considered lost media. Metroid Prime Hunters is a first-person shooter game developed by Nintendo's software technology team, and released on March 20th, 2006 in North America. This prototype at E3 2004 was its first official showing. Metroid Prime Hunters appeared on the show floor exclusively in the form of a multiplayer-only 4-player deathmatch. Players would spawn in as one of 4 different colored Zamuses and roam around a small spaceship-like area, shooting at other players and aliens. The top screen served purely as a map, while everything else was allocated to the bottom screen. Players could move Samus using the D-pad, with left and right controlling strafing, and up and down having her step forward and backwards. Dragging the stylus would allow the player to look around and aim Samus's blaster, and quickly tapping the screen would fire it. L and R were used to lock onto opponents, and the face buttons were used for switching weapons. Players could enter Samus's morph ball form by tapping an icon on the bottom screen. While similar to the final game, these controls differ in a few ways. For example, the final game uses the L button for shooting, rather than having the player tap the screen to fire. While the final version of Metroid Prime Hunters featured a choice between 2 control methods, stylus mode and dual mode, the control scheme featured in this build seems most similar to the touch shoot mode exclusive to Metroid Prime Hunters First Hunt, a demo of the game that was released as a pack-in title with original DS systems. The UI in this demo is significantly different from both First Hunt and the final game. Notably, gameplay was shifted to the top screen in subsequent versions of the game, while the bottom screen served as the map, reversing what was seen in the original demo. Metroid Prime Hunters was one of the most well-received games on the DS that year, receiving high marks from numerous major publications. Many took note of the game's stunning graphics, with Nintendo Official Magazine writing, quote, "Up on the big screen at the conference, we assumed Nintendo was lying. There was no way the Metroid Prime Hunters footage it was showing on the big screen could possibly be from the DS. It was GameCube footage, surely." IGN's Craig Harris held a similar opinion, writing in his hands-on article, quote, "The engine running on the Nintendo DS hardware is rather stunning since, at first glance, it really does look like the GameCube game but in a shrunken down form." Later that month, IGN staff awarded Metroid Prime Hunters as the best Nintendo DS game of E3 2004. As previously mentioned, a demo of Metroid Prime Hunters, subtitled First Hunt, was released as a pack-in title with the DS on November 20th, 2004, but the final game wouldn't be released in North America until March 20th, 2006, almost 2 years after its initial unveiling at E3 2004. This was because Nintendo had received negative feedback from fans after Hunters returned for E3 2005, with no plans for online play over Wi-Fi. In August, Nintendo announced they had made the tough decision of delaying the game to ensure it would launch with online play over Wi-Fi. When Metroid Prime Hunters was finally released 7 months later, it received critical acclaim, currently holding an 85 out of 100 on Metacritic. Nowadays, it's relatively easy to get a copy of both Metroid Prime Hunters and First Hunt, but as for this particular E3 2004 demo, it unfortunately remains lost media. WarioWare Touched is a party minigame collection developed by Nintendo SPD and Intelligent Systems and released on December 2nd, 2004 in Japan. It served as a launch title for the Japanese release of the DS. This prototype at E3 2004, under the name WarioWare Inc DS, was its first official showing. In typical WarioWare fashion, this demo faced the player with an onslaught of microgames that you have a very small amount of time to complete, based on minimal instructions. Much of this formula is preserved in this demo, with one major change. Instead of each minigame having its own 4 to 5 second timer, there was only one timer shared across all the minigames in your run, counting down only while a minigame was active. This was likely put in place to make sure everyone got a turn, as inevitably someone with excellent reaction time would be able to hog the machine for a prolonged period of time. How long this timer was exactly seems to vary wildly between different sources. In footage GameSpot captured on the show floor, we can see the timer was 20 seconds, but Nintendo's official E3 2004 press kit describes the timer as 35 seconds. Finally, IGN says the timer was 1 minute long in their article. It's possible the timer was different between the public and private areas, or that Nintendo adjusted the timer as the traffic flow to the DS area changed. In the demo, Wario would stand in the middle of the road on the top screen, hurling numbered crates towards the bottom screen. The thrown crate would then move up and start a microgame. Completing the microgame would have Wario throw a quick temper tantrum before throwing another crate at the player. When the overall time was up, the current microgame would be automatically lost, with the crate flying back up to the top screen hitting Wario, knocking him out. Across all footage and screenshots of WarioWare Inc DS, I was able to observe about 13 microgames. Greedy Hands, Free Range, Steel Chef, Impressionism, You Scratch Mine, Good Times, Catch of the Day, Cage Match, Where's Wario, Quite Puzzled, Chock Full, Right On Dude, and what I believe to be a very brief and blurry snippet of Big Bang. Additionally, IGN's hands-on article for WarioWare describes a few more microgames, including Number Cruncher, Hookin' Up, Long Division, and Farm Fresh. GameSpot's Ricardo Torres also penned an article about WarioWare, describing one more new microgame, Finger Painting. Assuming all these microgames were present in the build on the E3 show floor, this would push the total microgame count present at E3 to 18. While all of these microgames seem extremely similar to their counterparts featured in the final game, there are a few slight differences here and there. Examples are the instructional text being changed in some microgames, and Steel Chef requiring the player to cut 6 objects as opposed to the final game's max of 4 objects. WarioWare Inc DS was one of the best received games for the DS on the E3 show floor, being listed as a runner-up in IGN's Best Nintendo DS Game of E3 2004 award. When WarioWare Touch released in North America on February 14, 2005, it was met with favorable reviews, with IGN awarding it an 8.5 out of 10, and GameSpot awarding it a 7.2 out of 10. As for this E3 2004 demo, the last in the public DS showroom, it has unfortunately yet to be found and is considered lost media. And that concludes every game in the public room. But before we continue on to the private room, first let me say thank you for watching almost 40 minutes of this video so far. Even if I stopped right here, it would be the longest video I've ever made. Fortunately, there is still a lot more left of the video. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider liking and subscribing and commenting and hyping and whatever else. It really helps the channel and keeps me motivated. Okay, now with that said, it's time we move on to the games in the private DS room. Balloon Trip was a tech demo developed by Keizo Ota and other members from Nintendo EAD. Clearly taking heavy inspiration from the classic Super Nintendo game, Yoshi's Island, the demo would begin with a stork carrying Baby Mario flying through space. Once the player pressed start, the stork would drop Baby Mario, and he would begin his descent down to the ground. As he descended, the background would change from space to a sunset before having Baby Mario enter a mountainous forest area, and finally ending the demo by having him land on Yoshi's back. On the way down, there would be plenty of coins to collect and enemies to avoid. This would be done by drawing lines on the bottom screen for Baby Mario to land on and slide across. Yellow coins were worth 1 point, while blue coins were worth 2. Circling an enemy with the DS stylus would turn them into a bubble that would float upwards, containing an additional blue coin. A few more coins could be collected at the very end of the demo by tapping on specific leaves on the trees. Baby Mario would begin the demo surrounded by 3 balloons. Getting hit by an enemy would pop one of these balloons, and it can be assumed that losing all 3 would bring a premature end to the demo. At the end of the demo, the player would be scored based on how many coins they collected and how many times Baby Mario was hit. According to an Insider interview with the demo's chief programmer, Keizo Ota, Balloon Trip began its life as a title for the GameCube in the form of a puzzle platformer where Yoshi would have to protect Baby Mario. This GameCube version was still in the concept phase when Nintendo EAD's general manager, legendary video game designer Shigeru Miyamoto, suggested that the game would make a much bigger impact as a DS title. Balloon Trip was still in very early development when it was revealed at E3 2004, and it wasn't until after the project received an overwhelmingly positive reception from attendees that Nintendo executives were, quote, forced to greenlight the project as a full game, after which the project was assigned more team members, including the game's director Hiroyuki Kimura, and developed into a full title. Balloon Trip would be released as a full game on January 27, 2005 in Japan, under the new title of Yoshi Touch and Go, with the original concept scene in the Balloon Trip demo serving as one part of Yoshi Touch and Go's core gameplay. Yoshi Touch and Go would receive a generally favorable reception, with GameSpot's Ryan Davis giving it a 7.2 out of 10, stating, quote, "The novelty of the gameplay is almost palpable, but so are the game's tech demo roots. Unfortunately, the original Balloon Trip tech demo has never resurfaced, and is now considered lost media." Bomberman DS is an action puzzle game developed by Rakjin and published by Hudson Soft and released on May 19, 2005 in Japan. This prototype at E3 2004 was its first official showing. For those unfamiliar with Bomberman, the general idea of the game is that you're in a simple grid arena, surrounded by bricks. You can place bombs that blow up into cross-shaped explosions to destroy these bricks, but you have to be careful because said explosions can kill you as well. The bricks often drop power-ups, like making your explosions bigger or letting you place more bombs at a time. In single-player mode, the goal is usually to kill all enemies or find the hidden exit in the bricks, while in multiplayer mode, the goal is to eliminate all the other Bombermen. This has been the basic formula of almost every Bomberman game since the release of the first game on the PC-88 in July of 1983, and this demo at E3 2004 plays much the same, with a few noticeable twists. When the demo began, the player would be met with a tire pump on the bottom screen, connecting to a deflated balloon on the top screen. The player would then have 30 seconds to pop this balloon as fast as possible. The player could fill the balloon by sliding the stylus up and down the bottom screen, moving the tire pump and thus inflating the balloon. The faster this was done, the more items the player would start with at the beginning of the battle. Failing to pop the balloon within the allotted 30 seconds would result in no starting items, but nonetheless bring the player into the next phase of the demo, which was a typical Bomberman battle. This battle would consist of the player and 3 computer-controlled opponents, mimicking the feel of a real multiplayer battle. The second twist of the demo comes in its presentation here. The bottom screen would display standard overhead 2D Bomberman visuals, but the top screen would display a full 3D rendering of this same action, with a more zoomed-in camera angle focusing on the player. As there is no on-screen timer, the demo would presumably end once the player had either lost or won the battle. According to Nintendo Official Magazine, the DS stylus could be used to chase away opponents on the bottom screen. GameSpot reports the stylus being used in another way, saying players could rub a negative status effect off of Bomberman using the stylus. Nintendo's official E3 2004 press kit clarifies this, saying a ghost could infect Bomberman on the top screen, which wouldn't let him move until it was scratched off of him on the bottom screen. Bomberman would launch on June 21, 2005 in North America, interestingly being published by Ubisoft in the States, dropping the DS from its title and removing the 3D view you see on the top screen in this demo, instead opting for larger 2D arenas taking place on both screens. It received generally favorable reviews, currently holding a 75 out of 100 on Metacritic. Unfortunately, this particular prototype of Bomberman remains undumped and is considered lost media. Egg Monster Hero is an RPG developed by Neverland and published by Square Enix, and released on March 24, 2005 in Japan. This prototype at E3 2004 was its first official showing, and one of, if not the only time its cancelled English translation has ever been shown. Based on the Japanese exclusive real-time strategy series, Hanjuku Hero, Egg Monster Hero is the overall 4th installment in the series, and its only spin-off. The gameplay of Egg Monster Hero was considered confusing then, and is even more confusing trying to piece together now. But based on the articles and limited footage of the demo, I believe I have pieced together the general idea of how this prototype of Egg Monster Hero played out. The demo was split into 2 stages. IGN and Nintendo's official E3 2004 press kit agree on the same order of these stages, while Nintendo Official Magazine and GameSpot claim they were the opposite. For this video, I will be following the stage order provided by IGN and Nintendo's press kit. The first stage of battle consisted of 2 armies clashing on the top screen. The player's army could be controlled by dragging them into the enemy via a simple map display on the bottom screen. After doing so, the battle would automatically play out on the top screen. Stage 2 consisted of a battle between 2 monsters, named Red Dragon and Terry McGaia. The bottom screen featured a grid, which would first feature the demo's opponent, Red Dragon. The player would then select on the grid where to attack the dragon. After making these selections, the grid would change to display Terry McGaia, who would use different attacks in the battle sequence depending on where the player had tapped on the grid. Once the selections were made, the battle would commence on the top screen. During the battle, text would display describing the attacks in quirky ways. IGN and Nintendo Official Magazine both reported that the game was suffering from a rather poor translation. While the dialogue seen in the footage seems grammatically correct, it is rather strange. Egg Monster Hero was a strange little game that seemed unappealing to some on the show floor, with IGN's Craig Harris stating, quote, "Does it make any sense? Hell no. Will it ever see the light of day in the US? I'll bet no as well." And he'd be right. As previously mentioned, Egg Monster Hero never came stateside, and this E3 2004 demo unfortunately remains as lost media. Mario's Face, sometimes called Face to Mario, was a tech demo developed by Nintendo and featured at E3 2004. Both the Mario Wiki and the Lost Media Wiki claim this tech demo was made specifically by Nintendo EAD, most likely because Nintendo EAD was a team that developed Super Mario 64 DS, though I couldn't find a source for this, so take it with a grain of salt. Reminiscent of the title screen for the original Super Mario 64, Mario's Face was a simple tech demo allowing you to stretch and distort Mario's face, except this time with a few more options and the appearance of Wario. Mario and Wario appear to be the only faces featured in the demo, per all screenshots and footage I could find. But perplexingly enough, Kikizo mentions in their article about the demo that the player could pick between 4 different unnamed characters. This remains a mystery, as no footage of any additional 2 characters has ever been found. In the demo, the bottom screen of the DS would be occupied entirely by Mario or Wario's face, which could have its nose, mouth, and ears manipulated. Below the head would be 4 buttons. These buttons appear to do different things depending on which version of the demo was being played. Analyzing the footage seen on the E3 show floor, it seems these buttons from left to right were stretch, stretch and keep, rotate, and lighting. Screenshots taken using a capture device after E3 show a different set of controls, which remain mostly the same, though the rightmost button is instead a reset button, as the lighting and rendering were instead toggled by pressing B. According to the instructions in this same screenshot, the D-pad could be used to rotate, and Mario and Wario could be swapped by pressing A. On the top screen, a familiar-looking Mario landscape would be displayed, complete with a warp pipe in the center, a question mark block containing a star to the left, and a POW block to the right. It seems that whichever character wasn't on the bottom screen would live on the top screen, hopping down the warp pipe when it was time to swap places. At one point in IGN's footage, some options appear on the top screen too. I suspect that these were the same options as on the bottom screen, but it's impossible to tell due to the recording quality of the video. Like many of these tech demos, a different build of the game can be seen in footage captured outside of E3. This version sports buttons with designs that appear different from those seen earlier, as well as a different background reading Face to Mario. Mario's face was seemingly retooled to a significant degree for Super Mario 64 DS's title screen, which featured a similar render of Mario's face that the player could turn into a sketch and play around with. However, this original demo of Mario's face has unfortunately never been found and remains as lost media.
There's nothing.
Thank you, son.
Mobile Suit Gundam Seed is the 9th installment in the long-running Gundam series, which ran from October 5th, 2002 to September 27th, 2003. I've not gotten around to watching any of the Gundam series yet personally, but I'm trying my best to get the facts straight in this section. If I make any mistakes, I apologize. This is probably the most elusive and mysterious tech demo in the whole video, as there is shockingly little information on it. Despite IGN reporting that Mobile Suit Gundam Seed was playable in the private DS room, it is literally the only game presented for the DS to not receive a hands-on impression article by IGN, nor does there seem to be any footage of it on the E3 show floor. I even checked the Wayback Machine to see if there was an article or additional footage of it at one point that got deleted, but no, it just got skipped. The only footage of Gundam Seed I could find is a 7-second clip of the game recorded outside of E3, alongside various screenshots IGN uploaded to their website after the exhibition. No article and no show floor footage. The footage we do have is similar in nature to the captured footage for most other tech demos, which usually feature differences between the captured version and the show floor version. So if show floor footage is ever found, it will likely appear visually different. Luckily for Gundam, GameSpot's Ricardo Torres wrote an article about the game on the show floor. This, combined with short blurbs written for Nintendo's E3 2004 press kit, Nintendo Official Magazine, and IGN's homepage for the game, can give us a fairly decent grasp of how Gundam Seed worked. The demo would begin by giving the player a choice between 3 different Gundams. These choices aren't documented in any article, but in the small amount of footage we have, we can see a white Gundam with red wings and red boots, which I believe to be the GAT-X105 plus AQM/E-X01 L-Strike Gundam, piloted by the show's protagonist Kira Yamato. Additionally, in some screenshots uploaded to IGN's website, we can see what I believe to be the GAT-X303 Aegis Gundam, piloted by the character Athrun Zala, who also appears in some screenshots. During gameplay, the footage shows the top screen displaying the selected Gundam flying through space, high above the Earth's atmosphere, while the bottom screen would display a radar and other options for the Gundam. Nintendo's press kit describes the opposite, with the radar being on the top screen while gameplay was on the bottom screen. It's possible this is one of the differences between the build on the E3 show floor and the build in this footage. The blurb on IGN's website claims the game was, quote, controlled entirely with touchscreen gameplay. However, this is contradicted by Ricardo Torres' GameSpot article, which states the face buttons of the DS could be used to boost around. In space, the player would fly around looking for enemies. Once these enemies were located, the bottom screen would display a radar with markers symbolizing their locations. Tapping an enemy on the radar would bring up an option menu featuring various attacks, and selecting one of these attacks would trigger an anime-style cutscene where the Gundam would destroy the enemy. And that is it for Mobile Suit Gundam Seed, a demo so elusive that all 6 comments on the only footage of it are confused. The last time I could find that Gundam Seed was ever mentioned was in an article by IGN's Anu Gantayat on March 11th, 2005, going over the announcement of a completely different Gundam game, SD Gundam G Generation DS, in which Gantayat writes, Nintendo's touchscreen portable is looking like the place to be for gamers who like their Gundam on the go. On top of Gundam Seed, Bandai has just announced SD Gundam G Generation DS for the system. Mobile Suit Gundam Seed would never be released on the DS. It's possible that the game's developer, Bandai, never even considered the game as anything more than a tech demo that remains lost media. PictoChat is a LAN messaging service developed by Nintendo, with this demo at E3 2004 being its first official showing. For those of you who don't know or don't remember, PictoChat was a simple messaging service that came pre-installed on every Nintendo DS, DS Lite, and DSi system. DS systems could connect wirelessly, within a range of about 65 feet, and allow users to communicate with each other by sending text messages or drawing simple pictures. Other users in the same PictoChat room could view these messages, copy them, make changes to them, and resend them. The version of PictoChat seen in E3 2004 seems identical to what was later released as a part of the DS firmware, though additional footage captured outside of E3 shows a different version with a much different UI. On the E3 show floor, PictoChat was set up with 2 systems that were connected to each other. Attendees were free to walk up and try out PictoChat by messaging each other. Interestingly, Nintendo Official Magazine staff noted that drawing any images deemed rude would get you ejected from the private DS area. IGN commented in their article on PictoChat that at this time, Nintendo was still considering whether it should be a part of the DS firmware or not, as that decision had not been finalized. Many years later, for an Iwata Asks article released on October 24th, 2008, the late great former president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, sat down with multiple members of Nintendo's software development and design department to discuss the then upcoming Nintendo DSi. When the discussion of PictoChat came up at the end of the article, Tomoaki Kuroume said, quote, "For the original Nintendo DS, PictoChat was included in order to maximize the appeal of the console itself." To which Iwata responded, quote, "It was our first attempt to incorporate this kind of software right into the console, so there was quite a lot of debate." Kuroume continued, "Right, when I think about it now, we prepared PictoChat as a tool for the Nintendo DS, but we sort of left how to play with it up to users, which is a little different than proactively providing users with specific opportunities for play. While we have a full version of PictoChat on all DS systems today, this standalone demo version of PictoChat seen at E3 has never been dumped and remains lost media." Sonic E3 Demo, colloquially referred to as Sonic DS, was a tech demo developed by Sega that was only ever seen at E3 2004. This is my personal favorite tech demo of the bunch and the only one I knew about extensively before I started researching for this video. I love Sonic, and I've always been enamored by the fantastic visuals on display in this game, though the gameplay itself has always seemed simplistic. Still, I've gathered everything I could find on it, so let's start at the beginning. The demo would start with a message on the top screen that read, "Switch camera angles by touching the camera icons," before changing to show Sonic running through a stage, very reminiscent of Seaside Hill from Sonic Heroes, which had been released only a few months prior in December of 2003. On the bottom screen were a slider, 3 camera buttons, and a skip button. The slider seems to have controlled the zoom of the camera, while each camera button corresponded to a different camera angle. Regardless, it seems like the camera angle once the game started would be the same, no matter which one you chose. This system was likely put in place simply so attendees could look at the visual fidelity of the demo from multiple angles. Upon pressing skip, the demo would quickly display instructions on the top screen reading, "Slide your finger along the bottom screen to boost Sonic's power." The game would then transition to show Sonic waiting at the starting line. After a second, an announcer would shout, "Ready? Go!" cueing Sonic to begin running. From here, the goal of Sonic DS was simply to reach the end of the stage. This was done by dragging your finger or the stylus back and forth on the bottom screen. The faster the player swiped, the faster Sonic ran. The top screen was used to display the actual gameplay, Sonic's ring count, that day's highest record, the player's current time, and a diagram showing how much of the stage was left. Sonic's head on the diagram was taken from his sprite in the Sonic Advance games. As the player swiped faster and faster, Sonic would hit different speed thresholds, with the bottom screen slowly changing colors as his speed increased. At 100 miles per hour, he would move noticeably faster, and the top screen would begin to be surrounded by speed lines. At 300 miles per hour, he would move faster still, and the speed lines would increase. At Sonic Speed 1, the game's colors would turn inverted, and the speed at which Sonic's model moved would slow down and be encased by a shield of wind in front of him. The player could also obtain Sonic Speed 2, 3, and 4, though there were no noticeable visual changes after Sonic Speed 1. Pressing the L button or tapping the top of the bottom screen would make Sonic jump, although it appears there were no obstacles on the course. This jump seems to have only aided Sonic by helping him reach additional rings. Rings would be scattered around the stage for Sonic to collect, seemingly in fixed positions. These rings appear to serve no purpose other than bolstering the player's final score, as Sonic is unable to get hurt in this demo. At the end of the course, Sonic would run into a ramp. Performing a well-timed jump off this ramp would net the player extra rings. After crossing the finish line, the screen would abruptly change to what I believe is not a pre-rendered video, but instead an entirely new, higher resolution model of Sonic, smiling and giving a thumbs up, before giving the player a score based on their top speed, final time, and total rings collected. The only 2 rankings ever caught on camera were the A and S ranks. An A rank would display the text, "That was tight," while an S rank would display, "Congratulations," in a fancy font. Afterwards, the demo would quickly fade to white, then show a screen reading, "Keep an eye out for Sega's titles on the DS." An amusing anecdote about this score system was shared in Nintendo Official Magazine's June 2005 issue, where the writer reminisced about an event that occurred at Sonic DS's kiosk with one of the magazine's other writers, Dean Scott, saying, quote, "Dean broke the records at the show and actually managed to break the game, so they had to dismantle the stand to reboot it." Oddly enough, this tech demo also features a seemingly original soundtrack, mostly made of remixes of songs from other Sonic games. I haven't heard these particular renditions anywhere else, but they might have just passed me by. On the camera selection screen, it would play a rendition of Seaside Hill. On the instructions screen, it would play the character select theme from Sonic Advance. During the game, it would play what sounded like a rendition of Live and Learn. Once the player entered Sonic Speed, it would play a rendition of Escape from the City. And upon passing the goal, it would play the very end of an alternative rendition of the opening theme from Sonic Advance. The results screen had its own theme that I didn't recognize as originating from anywhere else. News outlets at the time noted Sonic DS's distinct lack of gameplay, but heralded its fantastic visuals, with Nintendo official magazines saying it featured some of the best visuals on the DS, and IGN's Craig Harris stating in his hands-on article, quote, "The 3D effects in this Sonic E3 demo really does show off what the system can do. From decent amount of polygonal geometry for the character models, to the detailed backgrounds, to the really cool filtering effects that appear when Sonic zooms faster across the screen. But is it a game? Not even close." Sometime later, for their March 2005 issue, Nintendo official magazine's Mike Jackson interviewed then president of Sonic Team, Yuji Naka, and asked about the future of Sonic games on the Nintendo DS. Naka briefly spoke about a new Sonic title for the DS that would be playable at E3 2005, which ended up being Sonic Rush. Jackson then inquired about this future DS game's connection to the Sonic E3 tech demo, to which Naka simply stated, quote, "Yes, they are related." Jackson replied, "So it expands on what we saw at E3 last year." And Naka elaborated, "It doesn't expand from the demo, more like the demo is just one aspect of it." This has never been confirmed, but I personally believe some of the technology used to create Sonic DS was used for Sonic Rush's special stages, as there are also auto-running sections controlled with the touchscreen. This is off topic from Sonic DS, but I recommend Sonic fans check out this full interview. It includes some interesting stuff like Yuji Naka talking about the potential of a Mario and Sonic collaboration game 2 years before Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games came out, and one part where Mike Jackson asks Yuji Naka about the possibility of Sonic being in the next Smash Bros, to which Naka basically dodges the question. Unfortunately, the small part of Sonic DS that lives on somewhere in Sonic Rush is still the only way to experience even a fraction of what it was, as the original Sonic DS tech demo has never been dumped and remains lost media. Special Effects was a simple tech demo designed by Nintendo to show what kind of effects the Nintendo DS was capable of. The demo started with fireworks shooting off onto the top screen, with plain text reading, "Special Effects Tech Demo," in front of them. The bottom screen would simply read, "Touch to start," with an orange smiley face in the bottom left corner saying, "Welcome." This orange smiley was present during the whole demo, and tapping at any point would simply make it vibrate. Once the demo was started, the player would be treated to one of 3 possible demonstrations. The first demonstration had a bunch of boxes on the bottom screen obeying semi-realistic physics. The player could freely spin, fling, and move around these boxes. The second demonstration had a bunch of bubbles appear on the bottom screen, each containing a random effect. Dragging around the DS stylus could spawn clouds, people, spinning objects, fire, barbed wire, etc. The third and final demonstration involved a bunch of squares, each playing a different sound when tapped and launching a firework on the top screen. Nintendo official magazine seems to suggest that the squares in this last demonstration would change colors with every tap. Each demonstration had a timer of about 30 seconds. After 25 seconds, the orange smiley face in the bottom left corner would begin to count down from 5 before saying bye and ending the demo. The demo would then display a black screen with white text reading, "Thank you for playing, see you again," while the orange smiley face said thanks. Special effects simply served to show the many types of graphical effects the DS was capable of producing. It seems its assets weren't used in any other game, and has never been seen again after E3 2004, remaining as lost media. Submarine is a 2D simulation tech demo developed by Nintendo and first unveiled at E3 2004. The goal of the demo was to guide a submarine through an underwater cavern and make it to a safe spot at the other end within 2 minutes. This would be accomplished by controlling the submarine through 3 sliders on the bottom screen that each control a different aspect of its movement. On the far right is the depth slider. Pulling the slider up will have the submarine surface, while pushing it down will have it dive. Holding the slider in the center would keep it neutral. On the bottom left of the screen is the retreat and advance slider, which allows the player to move the submarine left and right. Last is the degrees slider, which allows the player to shift the angle at which the submarine is facing. This is useful in combination with the torpedoes, which can be used to dispatch enemies and breakable walls. The bottom screen also featured a full map of the level, showing the location of the player, the enemies, and the goal. The submarine itself is controlled unlike a typical action game, but more in a realistic way, with delayed and sluggish movements, forcing the player to think ahead while still trying to make quick enough movements to reach the goal in time. Failing to reach the end in time would lead to game over, with the bottom screen displaying approximately how far the player made it into the course percentage-wise. Successfully beating the course would greet the player with fanfare before restarting the demo, sending them back to the title screen. An alternative version of the demo can be seen in captured footage taken outside of E3, showing an entirely different UI and level design. Submarine was received relatively well, with IGN's Craig Harris describing it as one of the more complicated demos on display, ending his article by saying, quote, "It's another one of those fun, but not quite a full games at Nintendo's booth. So it's hard to say if development teams will expand on Submarine's design to make it a more complete package." Nintendo Official Magazine held a far more negative stance, describing the game as infuriatingly tricky. Still, Submarine's story does not end here, as E3 2004 was not the only time Nintendo exhibited it. 1 year later at E3 2005, Nintendo revealed ahead of the exhibition that they would be setting up stations that would send out multiple DS demos for download play via wireless signal. Anyone attending E3 that year who owned a DS could download and play demos for Polarium, Meteos, Table Hockey, Electroplankton, Zelda Preview Trailer, Zelda Gallery, and Submarine. As long as the Nintendo DS system remained powered, you had unlimited access to whichever demo you chose to download. Luckily, rogue video game preservationists were able to snag the signals through wireless 802.11 TCP packet capture, and download the files to their computers, preserving them online today. Thus, an E3 2005 build of Submarine, dated September 13th, 2004 according to the cutting room floor, is downloadable and playable today, alongside every other game available for download play at E3 2005. Except Polarium. Despite being built after E3 2004, this E3 2005 build seems identical to what was available on the show floor the previous year. I was able to download and beat the demo myself, and I actually think it's pretty fun, so if you have the means to do so, I recommend that anyone interested check it out. The title screen music, which would have been very difficult to hear on the show floor, is actually kind of a banger. The main melody of the song is made up of the Morse code signal for SOS. Really neat stuff. After 2 showings at E3, Submarine still wasn't finished. 5 years later at E3 2010, Submarine was unveiled to the world one last time on a new platform with a new title, now called Steel Diver. It was targeting the Nintendo 3DS as a launch title. In an Iwata Asks article released on February 25th, 2011, the late great former president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, sat down with Nintendo EAD's general manager, legendary video game designer Shigeru Miyamoto, and asked him about the production history of Steel Diver. This article offers a great deal of insight into how important Submarine was to Miyamoto. Iwata questioned Miyamoto on why Steel Diver is being developed into a full game now, so many years after Submarine was unveiled at E3 2004. Miyamoto replied, quote, "You're right that the development time was very long, but its initial planning started off even long before the Nintendo DS demo version was made. In short, I always wanted to make a flight simulation game." Later in the interview, Iwata says he believes Submarine wasn't just made as a tech demo, but instead Miyamoto made it because he always wanted to make a game like that, to which Miyamoto agreed. Miyamoto then asked Iwata if he remembered Steel Battalion, an Xbox game developed by Capcom that utilized its own unique 40-button 3-piece controller to simulate piloting a vertical tank. Miyamoto confided in Iwata that he was mortified when Steel Battalion released, as he felt that others had beaten him to the punch of developing a simulation game with a unique controller like that. Miyamoto continued, telling Iwata he never tried to make Steel Diver until the DS came around because he always wanted it to feel like you were piloting a submarine, something he saw as impossible with a simple controller featuring a joystick and buttons. Miyamoto specifically liked the idea of a controller with a throttle, a switch that stays in the last position you left it, something that didn't exist on any modern controller. Putting all of the controls on the bottom touchscreen alleviated this issue. Miyamoto described the feeling of controlling the game as akin to using an audio mixer. Iwata then asked Miyamoto why Steel Diver wasn't a game for the original DS then, if the DS had solved all his problems with the control scheme. Miyamoto replied, saying it was simply because his hands were full with other projects at the time, but elaborated further by stating, quote, "The project was on hold and about 2 years after the Nintendo DS system was released, one of the teams finally had time to work on it. That's when we resumed its development as a Nintendo DS title. But right as we were making it, the features of Nintendo 3DS system started to get fixed. So while we were developing, we thought, this would work so much better on the Nintendo 3DS system. It's basically a side-scrolling submarine game where you would move through a 3-dimensional body of water. We thought it would look so much prettier if there was a depth to it and the wide screen." Steel Diver would release on March 27, 2011 as a 3DS launch title in North America. It received a mixed reception, though it seems to have garnered a small cult following nowadays. The original E3 2004 Submarine tech demo has never been dumped, nor is the alternative version with a different UI and level, so they unfortunately remain as lost media. The near identical E3 2005 build is still available online to this day. Super Mario 64 DS is a 3D platformer and a remake of Super Mario 64 developed by Nintendo EAD and released on November 21st, 2004 in North America. It served as a launch title for the DS across all regions. This prototype at E3 2004, under the name Super Mario 64 x4, was the first official showing. Super Mario 64 x4 was unique in that it had 2 different kiosk demos available on the show floor, with one focusing on single player and the other focusing on multiplayer. In the multiplayer demo, 4 players controlling Mario, Luigi, Wario, and Yoshi would fight head to head, trying to collect stars spawning around Peach's castle courtyard. Hitting someone would make them drop their stars. Stars could spawn in front of the castle entrance, on top of trees, and even on the tail of a wild chain chomp roaming the area. Whoever had the most stars when the timer went off won. The time for each match was set to 30 seconds, but this timer ran very slowly and only ticked about every 3 seconds, making the demo last around 1.5 minutes total. According to IGN, the wing cap could be found somewhere in the demo, though they describe it as, quote, nearly impossible to find in the game's very short time limit. Before starting the single-player demo, the top screen would display the title and text reading, "For one player only." To play multiplayer mode, please go to the multiplayer machine. On the bottom screen, the player would be met with the choice to go to either Bob-omb Battlefield or Peach's Castle. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any footage or documentation about Peach's Castle in the single-player demo, so I'll only be going over Bob-omb Battlefield. In Bob-omb Battlefield, the player would spawn at the start of the level and be tasked with collecting up to 5 of the area stars within a 60-second timer, which, again, ran slowly and functioned more like a 3-minute timer. You'd start the level as Mario, but it seems you could switch to any of the other 3 characters at any time using the bottom screen. Also on the bottom screen would be the player's health and coin count, as well as an overhead map of the whole area. The top screen would display the aforementioned timer and how many stars had been collected. Bob-omb Battlefield appears pretty complete in this build, as the player could even fight King Bob-omb at the top of the hill and obtain his star. Observant players could also spot a neat Easter egg of some clouds in the skybox spelling out E3. Over the years, Super Mario 64 DS has been discussed at length, both positively and negatively, with a lot of the criticisms it faces nowadays being observed all the way back at its very first showing. One of the most common critiques of the game is its controls, with many players taking issue with controlling a 3D platformer without the use of an analog stick. And while Nintendo official magazines said they felt it controlled great even without an analog stick, IGN's Craig Harris was far more critical of the controls, stating, quote, "A lot more attention needs to be placed in the control department before this technology demo is ready for prime time." Super Mario 64 DS's multiplayer mode was a big part of its presence at E3 2004, despite this mode being relatively forgotten nowadays. Nintendo official magazine criticized the multiplayer, describing it as, quote, a bit uninspiring to say the least. Despite these criticisms, Super Mario 64 was received well upon its release later that year, currently sitting at an 85 of 100 on Metacritic. Unfortunately, both the single-player and multiplayer builds of the Super Mario 64 x4 demo have never been found and remain lost media. Table Hockey is a sports tech demo developed by Nintendo and first unveiled at E3 2004. Despite being named after table hockey, the game actually shares a far closer resemblance to the tabletop sport of air hockey. Table Hockey was one of the simpler tech demos on the show floor, having the player play a simple game of air hockey against a CPU in a futuristic-like environment. The player's half of the board would be visible on the bottom screen, while the enemy CPU's half of the board would take up the entire top screen. The hockey puck would seamlessly travel between the two screens, being programmed with just enough invisible space between the screens that the puck passing through the center of the DS felt natural. The player's air hockey mallet could be moved by grabbing it with the DS stylus and dragging it around, protecting their goal from the puck and attempting to send it back into the enemy's goal. Unique to Nintendo's interpretation of air hockey, each player's goal would be protected by an electric field, which would disappear once hit by the puck, leaving the goal open to an attack. The whole game was set on a 1-minute timer, which could be viewed on the top screen. Whoever had a better score when the timer went off would be declared the winner, and the demo would reset. Despite being a good opportunity for 1v1 multiplayer, IGN confirmed that the game was set to one player only, having the player always face a computer opponent on the top screen. Like many of the other tech demos that year, additional footage captured outside of E3 2004 shows another version of the demo, sporting entirely different visuals. If you recall from the Submarine section earlier, Nintendo would later exhibit multiple demos via DS download play at E3 2005, which is how Submarine was found. Table Hockey is in the same boat, being the only other demo returning from E3 2004 to be available for download play at E3 2005. It was archived the same way Submarine was, via game preservationists bringing laptops to E3, snagging the wireless 802.11 TCP packets, and downloading the files to their computers, preserving them online today. Unlike Submarine, Table Hockey was seemingly never used in any full game. The E3 2005 download play demo, which is identical to the demo from the E3 2004 show floor, can still be downloaded and played today. However, the alternate version seeing the captured footage remains lost. It's time to do the last game in the private DS room in Nintendo's E3 2004 booth. Yu-Gi-Oh! Nightmare Troubadour. For those curious, Troubadour is a very old word for a composer from the Middle Ages. Apparently it's pronounced Troubadour, but the guy who narrated the trailer for this game pronounces it Troubledoor.
Yu-Gi-Oh! Nightmare Troubadour.
So, I don't know, please don't get mad at me in the comments. Yu-Gi-Oh! Nightmare Troubadour is a turn-based card battling game developed by Konami and released on July 21st, 2005 in Japan. This prototype at E3 2004 was its first official showing. I'm going to be honest, as a child I really loved the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga and anime, but despite my best attempts to learn how to play the actual card game, I never really got it. I've been told Yu-Gi-Oh! Is kind of difficult to learn anyway, and this seems apparent by none of the journalists at E3 really understanding the game either. IGN and GameSpot both describe the game as typical Yu-Gi-Oh! Affair, while Nintendo Official Magazine's journalist straight up says they don't understand Yu-Gi-Oh! Regardless, it seems the heart of Yu-Gi-Oh! Nightmare Troubadour wasn't any sort of unique twist on the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but instead showing how classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Can be experienced on a system like the Nintendo DS. In Nightmare Troubadour, the top screen would serve as a 3D view of the board, slanted towards the players so they could see the cards in their hand up close. The bottom screen featured a top-down view of the whole board, plus the cards in the player's hand face up. A card in the player's hand on the bottom screen could be tapped and dragged into position on the battlefield, appearing on the top screen. Once a monster was put face up on the field, it would appear on the top screen in sprite form, featured prominently in IGN's footage of the cards Vorse Raider and Beautiful Head Huntress. When two monsters were ready to fight, their battle would take place on the top screen, with the loser being chosen swiftly. In general, this E3 2004 demo seems to feature a more minimalistic UI compared to the final game. And that's about all there is to know about Nightmare Troubadour at E3 2004. If there was a timer or any kind of restriction on this demo, it was never documented in any way. Yu-Gi-Oh! Nightmare Troubadour will be released on August 30th, 2005 in North America, receiving generally positive reviews. Nowadays, it seems to be one of the more fondly remembered Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. Unfortunately, it seems this prototype of Nightmare Troubadour has never been dumped and remains lost media. And that finishes off the private DS room at E3 2004, thus completing all of the games that were physically there that year. However, Nintendo announced and showed snippets of footage of an additional 3 games that year that weren't playable on the show floor. So before we wrap this video up, let's go through those last 3 real quick. Animal Crossing Wild World is a virtual life game developed by Nintendo EAD and released on November 23rd, 2005 in Japan. This prototype footage was its first official showing. While not revealed during Nintendo's E3 press conference on May 11th, 30 seconds of footage were released to journalists later that same day, under the working title of Animal Crossing or Animal Crossing DS. Wild World originally appeared to be much more similar to the Japanese exclusive Nintendo 64 original Dobutsu no Mori, colloquially referred to in English as Animal Forest. The character models, UI, and environments in this trailer are all strikingly similar to those featured in Animal Forest, and the camera angle is far more zoomed in than in the final release of Wild World. The short footage primarily shows how the touchscreen could be used to enhance the Animal Crossing experience, showing it being used to write letters, manage the player's inventory, and draw. Animal Crossing Wild World was released on December 5th, 2005 in North America, receiving critical acclaim. Unfortunately, the build featured in this footage has never been uncovered or shown to the public again, remaining as lost media. Mario Kart DS is a kart racing game developed by Nintendo EAD and released on November 14th, 2005 in North America. This prototype footage was its first official showing. In the 30-second footage released to journalists, we see Mario and friends driving around GCN Yoshi Circuit, accompanied by nothing but the sounds of their roaring engines. Immediate differences that can be spied are the item box being on the center of the top screen rather than being on the left, as well as the UI featuring a speedometer not seen in the final game. The lap counter is on the bottom screen rather than the top in this build, and the timer has a different font. The very attentive people over on the cutting room floor also noticed additional differences I would have never spied in a million years, like the skybox being a 2D background, different and fewer billboards, missing fences, etc. Mario Kart DS would go on to be critically acclaimed, having a long-standing reputation among fans as being one of the best entries in the Mario Kart series. Unfortunately, despite great interest from the fan base, this build of Mario Kart DS has never been found and remains lost media. New Super Mario Bros. Is a 2D platforming game developed by Nintendo EAD and released on May 15th, 2006 in North America. This prototype footage was its first official showing. Much like the last 2 games, 30 seconds of footage was released to journalists on May 11th. New Super Mario Bros. Is probably the most unfinished prototype that Nintendo unveiled that year. It also took the longest to release among all the DS games shown at E3 that year, not counting Steel Diver or unreleased games like Mobile Suit Gundam Seed, with New Super Mario Bros. Not coming out until almost 2 years after its unveiling. In the footage, we can see Mario traversing multiple different environments, collecting coins, warding off enemies with a fire flower, and running into the game's gimmick, the Mega Mushroom. The Mega Mushroom in this prototype appears strikingly different from its appearance in the final game, looking more like a normal Mario mushroom. In another scene, Mario inexplicably becomes giant without the help of the Mega Mushroom and runs across the screen, breaking blocks and knocking enemies over. The whole demo lacks music and is missing most sound effects. Even to the untrained eye, the physics here seem noticeably off, with Mario even clipping into the terrain at one point. Other oddities featured here include an unresponsive question mark block with a radically different design, and an incredibly anticlimactic final confrontation with Bowser. Once again, sleuths over at the cutting room floor piece together a list of every noticeable change in painstaking detail, which I'll be showing on screen now, so feel free to pause if that interests you. In an Iwata Asks interview on September 13th, 2010, released for Mario's 25th anniversary, the late great former president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, sat down with New Super Mario Bros. Producer, Hiroyuki Kimura. In the interview, Kimura gave some insight into when New Super Mario Bros. Entered development, stating, quote, After we released Mario Advance 4, people were asking if a 5 in the series would be released. That's right when the Nintendo DS came out, which was perfect timing, so I thought if we're going to make it, it should be a new title. In Japan, Super Mario Advance 4 came out on July 11th, 2003, meaning New Super Mario Bros. Wasn't even a year into its development before this prototype was shown, explaining its rough appearance. New Super Mario Bros. Would go on to be a critical and commercial success, spawning multiple sequels. Unfortunately, this early build featured at E3 2004 has never been found and remains lost media. And so we have finally gone through everything the Nintendo DS had to offer at E3 2004, including the hardware, the experience, all the games in the public and private rooms, and the footage. If you've made to the end of this video, then congratulations, you know more about the DS at E3 2004 than 99.999 repeating percent of the population. When I set out to work on this video, my goal was to make it the most comprehensive, be-all, end-all guide of everything DS at E3 2004. But with such a large number of games, some of which I admit I have no expertise in, I am bound to have missed some things. So please, if you know of any information regarding the DS at E3 2004 that I didn't go over in this video, please leave it in the comments below. And if you know the whereabouts of any of the lost prototypes and tech demos I went over here, please leave a comment and/or get in contact with video game preservationists. Thank you for watching.